Welcome to Rooted and Rising, addressing inequities and transforming higher ed. Bold conversations for change. In this podcast, we'll explore the deep, difficult, and dynamic questions of inequity and the transformational leadership required in today's college landscape. I'm your host, Jill Provo, Vice President, Equity International, here at Nova Scotia Community College. Now, for context in this inaugural episode, a bit about me. I'm a proudly biracial woman with lineage to the historic African Nova Scotian community. I've done work in equity spaces for over 20 years. Currently, here at NSCC, I lead the Human Rights, Equity, and Inclusion Department, as well as NSCC International. During the listening tour that I conducted last year, and thank you to everybody who showed up for a session, I hope you had a chance to read the final report that I shared with the college community back in June, a clear theme emerged. That theme was the need for more effective and open communication across the college about what we're doing to address inequity, as well as other change initiatives happening here at NSCC. So we really want to create space, open up the door, let people in to the things we're thinking about, the things that we're talking about here at NSCC. A bit of a word about the title. See, to me, Rooted really acknowledges the deep foundations of our shared equity work that is grounded in community, that is grounded in history, that is grounded in lived experience, coupled with struggles for justice, along with resistance and resilience led by Mi'kmaq, African Nova Scotian, and members of equity groups. Rising really signals growth and transformation and collective momentum towards a more equitable and inclusive future. And then, of course, addressing inequities and transforming higher ed really ties it all together and really shows our commitment to leadership, our commitment to action, and how serious we are taking this work to address inequities here at NSCC. So overall, I hope you see this as an example of demonstrating to the college how we are rooted in our values, yet rising to meet the moment. So we want to open the door and let you in to the complex, the nuanced conversations that we're having here at NSCC and not shy away from the tough stuff. So now, with that framing, there is no better way, no more appropriate way to launch an equity podcast than with Denise Pictou Maloney, Senior Advisor, Mi'kmaq and Indigenous Initiatives here at Nova Scotia Community College. Denise's leadership and her expertise really shows us the path to reconciliation, the path to doing better here at NSCC. Welcome, Denise, to this inaugural podcast, Sacred Agreements and Stolen Matriarchs. It's an honor to speak with you here today. Denise, let's get started. Maybe tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you come from, and what guides your work here at NSCC.
Thanks, Jill. Well, Alan. Name Deluisi, Denise Pictou Maloney. My name is Denise Pictou Maloney, and I am a proud member of the Sabaganagitic First Nation just outside of Halifax, Jibuktuk, in the territory, which most people would call the Atlantic provinces that we refer to as Mi'kmaq. And my ancestors have walked here and thrived in these lands for thousands of years. I carry a big responsibility with myself as a matriarch, as a mom, in making sure that I am responsible for reminding folks about the history, reminding folks about treaty, and reminding about issues like missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So I'm very happy to spend time with you here. There's a legacy that I'm responsible to uphold, and I'm really excited about this. Thank you. Well, Alan.
Thank you, Denise. And we're really fortunate to have you here working at NSCC, and I mean that from the heart. And so this episode really does focus on, we'll dig in more about treaties, about land, about loss. And so before we really kind of get deep in our questions here, is there anything in particular that you would like listeners to kind of hold in their hearts as they prepare to have this conversation with us here today?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things and challenges for not necessarily just people who have spent many decades here in this province is the idea around treaty and how important it is to uphold them and to inform newcomers about the ways in which our communities engage with our governance, with provinces, with the territories. So I think when you focus on setting the groundwork for understanding the relationship of treaty and knowing that, Mi'kmaq people didn't cede this land, that it was rooted in sovereignty and in sacred relationship with the land and with each other. So the Peace and Friendship Treaty is really about those relationships and how we go forward together, coming off of a legacy of dispossession and genocidal acts that have deeply impacted our trajectory today as First Nations in Canada. If you don't understand the history, then building relationships is going to be really difficult, because there has to be a mutual understanding of everyone's emotional impact. And it then becomes something that is more about humanity and not just a dot on the history line. And honoring the loss, to me, in making sure that people understand that the dispossession of land and the removal of our women in their positions as matriarchs has had a deep impact on how we go missing and murdered. And to me, honoring the calls to action through the TRC and through the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls 2S calls to action, these are not optional items. They are urgent and necessary in today's world as our numbers continue with our missing and murdered.
And Denise, on that note, I think it's probably fair to say that many people don't fully understand what it means to live in a treaty relationship. And so in helping us to really understand the significance of the treaties, the sacred documents made with the Mi'kmaq Nation, it's important, I think, for all of us to understand them not just as kind of historical documents, but really understand it as a living relationship with the Mi'kmaq Nation. And so just wondering if there's anything else you'd like to add about how that shows up for you in a college context, maybe in particular?
Well, you hit on one of the most important terms of this, is that they are living documents. They're not items of the past. They're not relics of the past. They're intentional commitments to mutual respect, coexist, and to share the stewardship of the land. And I think, we come from a legacy of history of conquest and ownership that, Indigenous and Mi'kmaq ways of knowing and being in shared relationship is foreign to a lot of people. We still see things happening across the globe that impact, that reality of people who the quest of having to own something. Sovereignty in relationship, these treaties affirm that sovereignty. They were never about land surrender. They were never, they were about building relationships, and they're rooted in Indigenous laws and values. So I think from a college context, it means that institutions and individuals have to actively uphold these agreements, and there has to be a commitment. And, these include embedding Mi'kmaq perspectives into rights and voices into our education, into our governance, and into daily practice. So I would say that really tapping into the calls to action and using that as a guide to lead us and to help us foster and build those relationships. I just see that as something that could never have a negative outcome. So I would say that, to close, that the commitment, it actually demands meaningful and sustained action. It can't be something that is just performative or tokenistic, and there has to be real accountability there. So.
Thank you for sharing that, Denise. One of the things you've said to me many times that I know I really appreciate is the fact that we have real work to do here at NSCC. There is no doubt about that. There's a long path ahead for us, but that the will is there, that, you can genuinely see in all of us, or many of us leading at NSCC and working at NSCC, a real will to want to do better. And so I do hope that's faith you will always maintain in the college, because I know for me, you believing that we have a genuine will to continue to do better is really important. Denise, the title of this episode is also talking about stolen matriarchs. And so from your perspective, why is it also important to center that particular crisis in our work to address inequities at the college?
Well, I started talking about treaties, and there was a reason for that. And it was about the coexistence and the sharing of the stewardship of the land and the relational connection to newcomers and to partners. But long before treaties existed, we had our Indigenous inherent rights that, from our own spiritual groundings and foundations, women are matriarchs. We are a matrilineal society. So when you dispossess women from their positions in their matrilineal society and you adopt patriarchal ideology, what happens is the value of women, including not just outside from community, but also inside community, they adopt those patriarchal ideologies, and then women become at high risk and they become the collateral damage. And if you know anything about society, women are the givers of life. If you can't grow that, it is an effective way, and is why one of the biggest challenges around war and things that happen in our globe is that when they take the women and children, you effectively have snuffed out generations of humans. So treaties, were meant to protect Indigenous rights, the rights to safety, dignity, and well-being. And when you emphasize Indigenous women, Mi'kmaq women, and missing and murdered women who are disproportionately targeted by violence, and the state fails to respond to that, it develops deep violations of those treaty commitments. So when we talk about how the relation between treaty and missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls can be said in the same breath, a lot of people, well, I don't understand. You're talking about women and you're talking about land. Our connection deeply is to the land. We call our territories Mother Earth because we believe that it's a living, breathing entity that sustains us and helps us. It's no accident that my ancestors have been here for over 14,000 plus years. That was intentional. There was an intent relationship with treaty, with the land, and it was treaty amongst nations as well, nationhood treaties. It wasn't just when newcomers came here. So I think in humanizing the conversation and placing missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and 2S individuals in the heart of the treaty conversations, you're actually moving away from the legal abstract agreements, and you're really making this about a real human impact. And that, to me, honoring treaties means confronting gendered violence and restoring accountability and respecting Indigenous sovereignty. So it's not just a principle, but it's actually an action and a practice. So.
And I love that point, Denise, about humanizing kind of the conversation. That really resonated with me. And so just wondering for you, knowing how many years you've been in this work with your own personal and professional connection to it, how do you kind of hold space for both grief while at the same time holding out hope as we continue to do this work?
I think that, you can get caught up in the grief. The grief can be overwhelming. There's deep intergenerational trauma in listening to firsthand stories around missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and 2S individuals. In a world, in a state, in a country that says that, we celebrate safety, we celebrate equity, and we still witness those inequities still living and breathing right in our own backyards, with water boil advisories, with, different levels of justice in terms of how we navigate the justice system or how we even navigate the education system. There's still inequity. I think that for me, at least, you have to acknowledge the pain. Grief is present in the names, in the faces, in the stories, and the future stolen by the MMIWG crisis. I will say that it demands that we listen. It demands that we witness and that we act with humility, and that we have to bring in hope, because hope lives in the legacy of our ancestors. And that is where I dig my hope from, because I think about the 7 generations that came before me, the 7 generations that'll be going after me, and acknowledging that in resurging our Indigenous ways of knowing and being in our laws through treaty, through reminders of commitments to relational connection to the land, and through the TRC calls to action and the MMIWG's calls to justice, that to me is where we start putting into action those commitments and reminding everyone that, grief is necessary because it's what grounds us, it what brings our humanity to the table. And hope to me is what moves us forward.
I love that idea of, the grief compels us to listen. I think there is a collective grieving. This isn't just the Indigenous community. This is all of us standing together with Mi'kmaq, with Indigenous community grieving, while also committing to action and finding hope together. And so for maybe in particular, Denise, non-Indigenous, non-Mi'kmaq listeners who are learning or unlearning here with us today, kind of what responsibilities do they carry now that they know this truth, or what does respectful allyship, what should that look like at the college?
Well, as a Mi'kmaq person, I always look for ways to decolonize and to dismantle colonial systems. And that's not a surprise to you, Jill, because that's what I talk about almost every day in my role is how can we decolonize this? How can we look to see that in our efforts to be inclusive and to achieve that equitable goal that we're all trying to do, that there's still people who can't even get to the table to have those conversations around equity. And one of the things that I want to challenge the college to is to really start digging down and not just settling for allyship. I really want to move beyond allyship. I want to encourage everybody to start looking towards accomplices, because they walk with us. Accomplices walk with us instead of just saying, "Oh, we support you." They'll be on the front lines with you. They'll be looking to dismantle colonial systems. They'll be there looking to step up, but in a vein of with us as opposed to about us. Allyship sometimes allows us to celebrate our efforts for our own effort, not necessarily for the commitment of putting yourself in somebody else's position. And that's why I prefer to talk about accomplice. So you're going to see me starting to talk about that a lot at the college. As much as I said, we talk about equity a lot, we don't talk about the inequity. And flipping that upside down and really putting a commitment to how important it is to remind ourselves what true relational allyship is. Allyship is a very empty, hollow word to me, because it's easy to, put a donation in or say, oh, that's, it's too bad this is happening. I want to contribute. But really, it's the effort of humanity to get on the ground with us and to hold that accountability, because we're exhausted, we're tired, and we can't expect Indigenous people or people of any other culture who is experiencing injustice to be the purveyors of that justice as victims. You can't ever expect that. So I want to start using the word allyship.
Well, that's important, Denise, and some key takeaways, I think, for listeners already across the college community that you just said there, which is talking more about inequity versus just equity, talking about being an accomplice, not just an ally. So really, really helpful thinking there, Denise, and feedback. And so maybe before we do prepare to close here, one final maybe question about reconciliation again, which, really is about as much about relationship and accountability as it is about action. And so just wondering maybe your final thoughts on what should reconciliation look like at the college?
That's a huge question.
Big question.
It is a big question. But let me just, kind of put it in a very succinct little tiny bullet point form of some of the key things that we want to consider. Certainly always available to come and have deeper conversations with folks at the college around what that really looks like for them, for each individual program, department, experience. It's not just a destination. Reconciliation can't be about getting to a destination. It's a shared journey that we're all assigned to. And I say assigned to not in a scripted way or not in a prescribed way. It's really as humans in how we show up. Reconciliation is everywhere. It's not just about Indigenous people. It's about repair. It's about truth and acknowledgement. It's having real intentional, deep, systemic transformation that's grounded in truth, justice and Indigenous leadership, Indigenous relationship, however you want to see it. And it will be in different levels at the college. But it's that connectivity. I would say that making sure that we take an effort to embed Indigenous views and Indigenous rights into everything we do at the college. And it's not just intentionally for Indigenous people, it's that relational part that everyone benefits from that. And making sure that we're aware that there's legal and moral imperatives out there right now. You know, the TRC and the MMIWG calls to action and calls to justice are legal imperatives. So the federal government has actually asked us that we must implement those calls to action and those calls to justice. You know, to date, we're coming on a decade, I think, since the TRC launch, and I think not even 10% of the 94 calls to action have been implemented nationally or even regionally in our communities. So I would say there's a lot of work to do, and making sure that we don't stop with just the word of reconciliation, that we actually consider the systemic change that has to happen, the systems change that will result in that systemic change that's going to embed that justice and that equity into everything we're doing. Making sure that we consider cultural safety and accountability, because those are the ones that are the retention plans for our staff and our students, is where we show up to support and to acknowledge those deficits in our policies, in our processes, that doesn't retain our staff of our students. So I think that reconciliation is a big loaded word, and understanding what real relational reconciliation means, what systems changes, and certainly cultural safety is a big thing for me, because I would say that in the scope of supports, we're still not autonomous in our availability to access those supports as autonomous. We're still prescribed by the federal government on how that happens. So it's really important when we're in institutions of higher learning that we have access to that cultural support.
Yes. Thank you, Denise. Really appreciate your time here today. And so, is there anything that wasn't asked, or any final thoughts that you want to share that you would like listeners to carry forward after listening to this podcast?
I think my final thoughts are to encourage our staff, our faculty, our leadership, our students to be brave and courageous, to carry the names,
Yes,
the teachings, and the responsibilities with you, and let them shape how you learn. Let them shape how you walk, how you lead, and how you live. Reconciliation isn't just about institutions, it's about each and every one of us. So to me, that's a takeaway I would like everybody to take today. Llewellyn.
Yes. Beautifully said, Denise, as always. So thank you for listening to Rooted and Rising. Thank you, Denise, for your expertise, for your leadership, and for sharing your insights with us today. We are all treaty people. For now, thank you for listening. This is just the beginning. Stay connected and stay curious. And NSCC, let's continue this journey together. Until next time, take care and take action.
Llewellyn.
Thank you.